AIG, the recipient of the largest pot of corporate welfare from the government in the history of the world, $185 billion, now claims that it too may sue Goldman Sachs, claiming that it too was victimized by the now infamous mortgage-backed securities that it insured, and that the SEC now claims Goldman Sachs visited upon two banks. Don't believe it. This is the same AIG that accepted the government's advice when it sought the $185 billion and did not reveal to the public that the first $13 billion of the $185 billion was going to, and eventually did go to, you guessed it, Goldman Sachs. These two scoundrels have milked the government dry in order to enrich themselves. It's extremely unlikely that they will engage in litigation against each other, lest a real can of worms be opened and the public and the government learn exactly how these entities operate. Joining me now is Mark Calabria, Director of Financial Regulation Studies at the Cato Institute. Mark, it's a pleasure. Welcome to Freedom Watch.
My pleasure to be here.
Do you believe that AIG would actually go after its patron, Goldman Sachs? Or is this just some leak that the government has put out there in its effort to try and poison the well and make us think that everybody in Wall Street is bad?
Well, let's remember that the largest owner in AIG is still the federal government. So I couldn't believe that AIG would even contemplate a lawsuit without talking to the Treasury Department first. So I think to any extent that AIG is talking about suing Goldman, they're probably doing some of that talking at the urging of Treasury. And I think a lot of this is just to put pressure on Goldman and to put pressure on the rest of Wall Street to agree with Obama's financial reform bill.
I suppose that would be the easiest path for the president if the financial community just threw up their arms and said, OK, regulate away, you know, put the chains, put the handcuffs on us. You decide what we earn. You decide who we contract with. You decide what investments we make. I mean, the government would love nothing more than that. Now the Republicans will look like the odd guy out.
And that's exactly what they want to do, is the administration wants to basically control not just Wall Street, but we're talking about Main Street lenders as well. There's far more in Senator Dodd's bill that impacts community banks and small lenders than it does that impacts Wall Street. So this isn't simply about controlling Wall Street. It's about controlling finance across the country.
All right. I'm glad you raised that, because when Senator Dodd speaks as recently as earlier today, he truly demonizes Wall Street, even more so than the president does. He really makes it an us against them. Tell us, Mark, how this is also an assault on Main Street, on small businesses, on small banks, as well as an assault on the big guys downtown.
I mean, it's actually mostly an assault on the small guys. For instance, take Senator Dodd's new Consumer Protection Bureau. Well, you know, one would think with all of his talk about Wall Street that it would cover Wall Street, but it doesn't. All Wall Street oversight remains at the failed SEC, whereas if you're a small community bank or you're a small lender, you're an auto dealer lender, this little bureau can decide what you do, the charges that you charge, and it goes after about anybody. And this is the most expansive. Its power is to make the SEC look small. And this is all directed at Main Street America, not at Wall Street. For the most part, Wall Street comes out of this bill actually looking pretty good compared to the hit that Main Street's going to take.
We're chatting with Mark Calabria from the Cato Institute. What is the purpose of the $50 billion slush fund? I mean, we throw around these numbers as if we're talking about pocket change. It's only $50 billion. Well, I suppose compared to the $14 trillion we're in debt, $50 billion is small. But think about it. Should the Treasury Secretary, should any Treasury Secretary, should anyone in the government have a checkbook for $50 billion that they can spend however they want? And isn't that what Senator Dodd's bill creates?
That is very much the case. And the thing to keep in mind here is this is exactly what the administration wants. If you go back, for instance, and you look at the last time that Geithner was at Treasury during the Clinton administration, he used the Exchange Stabilization Fund. There are billions of dollars sitting around to bail out Mexico and Wall Street then. The objective of the administration with this is they believe that Congress, if pressed to it, would not reapprove another TARP. So what they want to create is their own pot of money that they never have to go back to Congress for. Of course, they're spinning this as, well, you know, we need $50 billion, so if we take over an institution, we can keep the lights on. I mean, whose electric bill is $50 billion?
Right.
You know, so the argument.
If you read the Constitution, which I know you have, as have almost everyone who's watching and listening to us now, Mark, you know that the Congress can, only the Congress can spend the money, and the Congress can only spend the money with specificity. If you read Supreme Court opinions on this, the Congress can't delegate away to the executive its responsibility any more than the executive could delegate away his responsibility to the Congress. So what are we doing here but giving some bureaucrat, whether it's Tim Geithner or some successor, the power not to keep the lights on, but to bring down anybody that he wants by buying their stock and putting them out of business and making the government the owner?
I mean, this is really one of the biggest problems in this bill, and I would agree. This bill is just like the TARP was, is a massive delegation of authority from Congress to the executive branch. And just like the bank bailouts from the Federal Reserve and the TARP are essentially allowing the executive branch to spend money, which, as you mentioned, the Constitution clearly requires all money to be appropriated by Congress. This gets around this. And it does it in a variety of forms. For instance, the Dodd bill takes the SEC out of the appropriations process. It has their Consumer Bureau paid for by the Fed, basically printing money. This takes us along the precedent of why even have an appropriations process? What's next? The Fed's going to start paying farm subsidies? So this process never really ends, and I think this bill is one of the very many largest assaults on the Constitution we have seen in the near term. And it also gives the ability of basically the Treasury to take over companies. It's one thing if you're a bank and you've signed up for deposit insurance, which has its questionable in and of itself, but this bill allows you to essentially take over a company.
Mark Calabria of the Cato Institute, thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.